Good evening, everybody. It's 5 o'clock, July 19th at the Educational Service Center in the West Pine School District. This meeting is the committee for reconsideration of the Bus 57 and its use at the high school, both in the ELA curriculum and as a library resource. So this team will be finishing up that process. We had a meeting approximately 2 weeks ago for our first initial meetings, as we did have a couple of members present, and for our audience members and for those watching maybe at home or watching the video later, I am going to do introductions. So I'll start out. My name is Tim Harder. I'm the Director of Technology, Libraries, and Career Education for the school district. I'm the chair of the committee. My job is to basically make sure that we follow the entire process laid out in board docs, or excuse me, in our board policy and our administrative rules, making sure that we're on task and then complete our assignment. We'll have about an hour tonight for tonight's meeting, so I'll go more in depth a little bit later on, but then I'll focus with.
Jennifer Potter, I'm the executive principal of the high schools.
Susan Sarek, assistant principal of East and West High School.
Stacy Baldwin, I'm the parent of a student that will be a junior at West.
I'm Anna Pachesny, and I'm a rising junior at West Bend East.
I'm Danny Schumacher, and I teach English at West High School.
I am Kristen Becker, and I also teach English at West High School. Kim Christensen, district librarian.
So thank you, everybody. So since our last meeting, we asked committee members to review the book, review the packet of information provided us by Ms. Hager, the information that I provided you around our policies and so forth. And when you look at the administrative rule in terms of what that looks like in terms of the reconsideration process, we have two items that we need to attend to this evening as part of this committee. The first one being to identify the strengths of the resource and areas of concern. And then the second is this group needs to make a recommendation to the superintendent. I just want to be clear for this committee, for our audience, our public viewing at home or watching later, is this is a recommendation to the superintendent or to the Board of Education. This committee does not choose to remove materials. If there is a removal that is done through this or the appeal process, that actually goes up to the Board of Education at that point in time. Once we are done with this entire process, I will be writing up a report that will go to Ms. Hager, to the superintendent, and then all of you will receive a copy. So tonight I do have my computer open. You'll see me typing notes feverishly and so forth for that. My hope is to finish those reports for all of our reconsideration committees by tomorrow at the end of the day, but for sure Friday at the latest at that point. But look for that to be emailed out to everybody at that same point in time. So again, just a reminder, we are here to make a recommendation this evening. Because this recommendation is or the reconsideration was an ask to remove both from the English language curriculum at the high school and the library, you can have a decision that is all one way or the other, or split in the middle and say we choose to keep here, remove here, or vice versa. So as you have those conversations tonight, be thinking that we have to address both aspects of that. Those of you who have sat on or watched the committee from the middle school, that was just for the ELA curriculum, so there was no library aspect for that. And there are different policies and procedures that guide our library curriculum or our library collection versus our curriculum here in the school district. So knowing that that is our task this evening, I am going to open it up to the committee members to share their strengths. First about the resource, related to the resource, and the educational value in the school district.
I found the reviews that we were provided with in the packet we received this time were, I thought, very helpful. I think any parent that would read through those would have a good sense of the book. And I agreed with them. The commonsensemedia.org rated it for ages 13 plus, so that's within the range we're looking at it for. I think definitely a strength was the topic of exploring race, class, gender, incarceration, and identity. In that commonsensemedia.org review, it rated things on a scale of 1 through 5, and it was rated 5 for positive messages in the book. It was rated 5 for positive role models, kind of showing that out of this horrible crime, there was, unconditional love by parents, friends, teachers. There was role models at the school that the students had looked up to. I thought the review was very comprehensive. In the booklooks.org, it was rated overall on their scale as a 2, which equaled teen guidance, that some content may not be appropriate for children under 13. So that rating fell within our range of we're looking at for high school juniors. So that review also agreed with that it's appropriate for high school. And then pluggedin.com didn't quite give as much, but they rated it ages 15 to 18, which was the range we were looking for. So I thought all the reviews we were provided with fell right in consideration with the age we're looking at. The biggest strength I think is the great group discussion points that students could have with this text. One thing that stood out to me that I think could be such a rich conversation was just that thought of a single quick moment can change people's lives forever. So Richard's decision in that moment to flip that lighter, and what that did to his life, I think that could be such a rich conversation for teens to have under the guidance of the teacher. And that I also, I think it's hard to find nonfiction that students like to read besides just fact books. This was written in a genre that I have not read a lot of, that it was a nonfiction, more as a narrative, and that it was using the second person was a kind of unique perspective. And again, just that it has so much true, well, it is true, the statistics, the crime rate statistics, the juvenile incarceration rates, the success rates of kids that go to juvenile hall, and I just thought there was so much value in that those discussions could be so rich between the students. And as I read, I was challenged and kept flip-flopping. Should it be tried as an adult? Should it be tried? So if I know I was having those inner monologues as I was reading, and just that the author really challenges the audience to think beyond the simple answers, to explore more about the incident and all the repercussions. I thought the Oakland High School students' response and the empathy they showed for Sasha was really uplifting. And then also the one teacher, Caprice, she was able to turn her life story of trauma and severe things she had gone to turn it around to help other kids avoid that. So I thought that was just such a positive role model, and just through reading it, I just thought I just kept thinking as I read, the rich discussion students in a guided conversation about this book could have, and really open them up to other perspectives. So I really, even the process, I learned a lot about the juvenile detention system and the court process and the statistics, and I find it a very worthwhile book, and I think it would lead to wonderful conversations in the age it's meant to, which high school juniors, I feel, would really be positive.
I agree with what Mrs. Baldwin was saying. I made an entire list of things that could be talked about. That history that we have in our country, that people are not treated well when they are sometimes different. I think that's something that a lot of our teens at the high school can definitely relate to. So aside from it being rich in discussion topics, I thought the encouragement of empathy was something that would be very good for our students in reaching a wide audience. It's inclusive, and I think it's very reflective of our evolving culture. The fact that the discussion on there's this or there's this, there's this or there's this, that duality that we seem to have, and that I think is something that a lot of young adults struggle with. That's not always life. Sometimes life is not just black or white. Sometimes there is the gray, and I think exactly what Mrs. Baldwin was saying, that there's so many things that our students could have discussions about.
I would agree. As I was reading the book, it made me think of, for those of you who might know me, this has become a real shock since I'm a book nerd, but it made me think of Kill a Mockingbird, which is also a frequently challenged book. But one thing that Atticus tells Scout in that book, he says, as they're having a conversation because she's frustrated with the student in her class, and he says, you never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb in his skin and walk around in it. And the idea of empathy, it's not something that's innate. It's something we teach. People are not born with empathy. It's something that has to be modeled. It's something that they have to discover. And to me, I guess, as I was reading this book, and I had read this book a year ago, and so rereading it now, really trying to keep the concerns, in mind. But as I read through it, I just thought, like, the empathy. And empathy is not about having to change for somebody else. I know there was a lot in the concerns about the normalizing the LGBTQ agenda. And I really, really struggled with that concept of an agenda, because as I read the book, I didn't see any agenda. I just saw an individual discovering themselves and not trying to tell the readers who to be or what to think. It was just, this is how I came to be who I, like, discover who I am, not change somebody else's point of view. And there's nothing in here, I guess, to me that spoke to an agenda. But when you read it, to read it and understand this is what it might be like to be someone who is different than what I am, to understand that someone might be transgender, or to someone who might be a person of color. I'm neither one of those things, but reading a book like this helps me to understand what those struggles might look like. Or to be a single parent raising, like for Richard, like a single mom, or, is that an agenda? I don't think so. You've got a set of parents, Sasha's parents, they're happily married. Is that a heterosexual agenda? I don't see it as that. And so to me, I really struggled with this concept of an agenda because I don't see it. I just see two children whose lives are set on a course that they did not expect from a single moment in time, and everything that came as a result, and the story of redemption. And there's such value to that. And our students, they make mistakes. We all make mistakes. But to see that you can make a mistake and you can grow from that and you can become a better human being, and that you can forgive somebody who has done something to you that other people might think is unforgivable. And so to get to the end of that book and to see all of that, I don't know, I just think to take that away from students as a choice would be a travesty.
To add on to what you're saying, the character development at the beginning, you get to know Sasha, and I think just having the history of just who they are really helps you to understand. And I have to admit, while reading, I was like, oh, Richard, he's just, what kind of kid would do that, And so I instantly judged, and then once we got Richard's story, the character development of Richard, I felt the compassion, I felt the empathy, where I was like, I know Richard now. And so even looking at that, how judgments happen, however, getting to know a person is really where the empathy and understanding comes in.
I kind of looked into a lot of the complaints after we had finished the meeting, and kind of piggybacking off of what you said with the suggested age for the reader, since we're more focusing on the high school, I mean, if a lot of places or a lot of websites are suggesting 15 to 18, that's still well within the range of a high school junior. But even besides that, I have looked on a few different websites, and I know Amazon recommended like reading ages of 12 to 18 in grades 7 to 9. And I also looked at the Lexile level, which really says a lot about a book. It's about 930, which is really comparable to like the Harry Potter books, the first 3, Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, Little House on the Prairie, like all of those books that, a kid would read. And I feel like the main complaint was that gender is a primary focus, but I really didn't feel like that was what the book was focused on. It was a nonfiction story, and it was compiled of all these different interviews and quotes and articles and all these different things from the news. And I think just because gender is a factor of the book doesn't mean that's the entire reason the book was written. I think the book was written to tell a story and tell it in a way that doesn't just focus on one aspect of a teenager's journey, but their entire journey. Because the main focus of this book is Sasha's journey, because their entire life was disrupted because of this random event that happened on a bus one afternoon. And just because gender's a part of that doesn't mean that's the entire focus of the book. And I also think that while some may argue this isn't good literature or this is written all in slang, it's not a good book, I also think that's super subjective. It's really dependent on the person, and while one person may not think it's good literature, there's still other people out there who think that there's a lot to learn from this book. And I think that overall for me, it was a super uplifting book. It's inspiring and just showing that main purpose of empathy, because all of these students, not even from Sasha's own school, but from other schools, rallied around them to support them, not because of their gender, but because they're supporting the person and showing them that they stand with them, because it's something, it's a really good lesson for kids my age to learn, because high school is tough, people are mean, and I think that reading, especially a true story, because this is something that actually happened, and it's characters that we can relate to, and we can find ourselves within them. It's just so important for high schoolers to be able to read this book and realize what it means to truly have empathy. And even though things may happen and they might change the course of your everyday life, there's ways to persevere and get through that. So I think that this book is super important. I think it should stay in the curriculum.
I don't want to jump all over what everyone has said, because I think everyone made really, really valid points that I absolutely agree with, but you said something that was the resonating factor for me. The theme that I kind of stuck with the whole time, and it's probably from my perspective of working with teenagers and leading teenagers, kids are mean. Bullying happens, and what you're saying about why understanding people's differences, I mean, the first thing bullying is attacking people's differences from you. That's essentially what that narrows down to. And it wasn't just that bullying is bad. We know that, we say that every day, we teach that, we model that, we try to promote that. This is a way that realistically showed and examined the consequences that can occur from that and how we move forward societal wise from that. And it's a real life exploration, so I don't want to just jump around and say I agree, but I do. But I also think that that's really what resonated with me, and hearing that it on the other end as a student resonated with you, I think is pretty worthy of a strike for the book.
Other strengths?
And I just wanted to go off what you had said, just in agreeance with the age. Well, you know, I looked it up and they talk like, it's listed in the Library of Congress as like juvenile literature. It's the publishers, it's the ages 12 through 18. When you look at the text, when you go online to see that. The awards that it's won also fall under the young adult, into the young adult category as well. And so, yes, there absolutely is content in here that's more mature, absolutely. There's profanity in here, absolutely. However, when you just put all of the profanity, you take every little spot out and lump it together, it makes it seem as though the book is just filled with this, and it's not. It's simply not, and all of the profanity is direct dialogue. It's their direct quotes. This is not the author. That is the language that was used, and I'm sorry if I was lit on fire, I might have some words to say as well that might not be completely appropriate. You know what, I don't know that that's, yes, we don't want our students to be using that language, absolutely. But I don't think, I've seen a lot of students who, to be honest, and you could disagree, but walk through the halls and quote the literature and say, I got it from such and such, you know what I mean? I don't think that that's really what we've seen much in the past.
I mean, if you walk through the hallway of a high school, you're probably gonna hear twice as much in the 5-minute period that we're in the hallway of profanity than that is in this book.
And that's not a West Bend thing.
Yeah, I don't think that
Yeah.
they're reading this book and be like, oh, these words are in here, so I'm gonna go say them. I think it's just a high schooler thing to do. So I really don't I don't think that the profanity is the biggest issue in this book. That the book is not just, it doesn't exist just so that there could be profanity in it. It's, like you said, it's direct quotes, and this is all compiled from like quotes, interviews, articles, all of that stuff. And I also, when I was reading through the complaint, it said that the book includes social justice commentary, and it focused on things like Oakland's crime rate and like what's going on in Oakland and all of those different perspectives, like how they're super diverse. But I don't think that's social justice commentary. I think that's more of the literal statistics of the city and putting into perspective how many different kinds of people live in the city and why something like this would happen. And I think that because it really, even though it's in a much more diverse area than there is in West Bend, it gives people much more perspective into what actually happens in the world and really shows just that, really the impact of empathy. No matter who you are, what you identify as, what race you are, your class, anything, it just really shows how all of these people can unite together for a common purpose to support a person, not just because of their gender or race or class, but because they persevere and because they are just there to tell their story. And I think that's something that really intrigued me about the book because I really, really enjoyed this book. And while others might not enjoy this book, coming down to it, it's still a choice book. You don't have to read it. Like, if you don't want to read it, you don't have to read it. And I think that's really why it should stay in the curriculum, because maybe somebody else wouldn't choose to read it, but that doesn't mean you're able to take away somebody else's right to read it, because this might be something that they're interested in. And just because you might not want to read it doesn't mean everybody should not have a choice to read it anymore. And I also think that it shouldn't be removed from the library either, because again, it's age appropriate. And what if somebody didn't get to read this book for English and wants to read it on their own time and don't have time to go to the library or can't get transportation to the actual public library? You can just get it at school and you can read it at school. And I think that's why it's really important to still have those books in the high school library too.
I also looked at, as I was reading through, and I had, interesting part about Oakland, I had written that same thing, I'm like, this is fact, like the social justice, this is just the reality, there's nothing about pushing anything. But when it talked about all of the books that have been removed from schools in the past year, and where the 57 bus falls, and that 41% of the reasons given to remove a book in general included explicit discussions of LGBTQ issues. Now, the word explicit can be looked at in two different ways. Explicit as just it's clearly stated, it's detailed, it's laid out there, or explicit as in describing something in a more sexual or graphic nature. And that word concerns me here because there, at least in this book, there is nothing explicit in a sexual manner. There's a lot of terms in here about sexualizing and sexualizing, and I know that can be looked at in two ways too, but that we have to be careful when we use a word like explicit or sexualizing, because there isn't anything sexual in this story. This is the book about sex. There's something graphic in there. There's really very little of any of that in there. I can't
So
think much
if
about.
a teen is picking it up
Right.
for,
they'd
be very disappointed.
Very disappointed if that's what we're looking for.
Because it is.
And to me, I just struggle with that 41% of the reasons given to the book are because of the LGBTQ issues. And to me, that speaks to a whole other issue. And I don't feel like that should be the reason that we take a book out of the curriculum.
Or out of fear that the book is going to be used as a how-to manual.
Correct.
Right,
This book is not, the goal of the book isn't to push
an
an
agenda.
agenda. It's not to turn kids transgender. It's not to make kids believe something. It's simply to talk about a story that has taken place. And I just, so much of the concerns here, and I understand, I mean, I don't want to negate anybody's viewpoints, but I just don't agree here. It just, if that's the reason, I mean, if that, to me, if that clearly is the reason, that's discrimination. And I would have a really hard time supporting that.
And with that being said, because in the complaint said the focus was on transgender issues. So I think that further supports how having those rich conversations in class and guidance from a teacher, really not to talk about focus of the book, but making sure that there is an understanding of the purpose of the book, which is to really understand point of view, character development, the knowledge and skills that students need as juniors. And it's not about how to become transgender.
I think that with the complaint about the book normalizing like LGBTQIA agenda, again, I didn't see an agenda anywhere. I think the book is really just about accepting who you are, whether I feel like a gay person would read a book about a straight romance, they wouldn't be like, oh, well, maybe I should be straight, like just turn straight because they read a book about like a girl and a guy like falling in love. And I don't think it's this, like if a straight person would read a book and be like, oh, well, I'm gonna be gay now. Like I don't really think that's something that happens. And I think that it's more so becoming comfortable with your own identity, whether it be in terms of gender or just being able to accept who you are, flaws and all. And I think that's really what the story is focusing on about. It's Sasha finding themselves, not Sasha figuring out that they're not straight. I think it's more finding themselves in their entire identity and becoming okay with who they are and just their whole journey through this entire process. I think that that's what the book is focusing on. And I don't think this book's intent was for people to turn people gay, considering, well, Sasha is not straight or not one definite gender. I'm 99% sure that there was also heterosexual romance in this book. I can't remember which characters in particular, but there were two characters. I think it might have been Richard and somebody else, or one of his friends, and they were like a couple. And I don't think that if a gay person read that would automatically decide to become straight. I think that it's just bringing everything into the mix, and I don't think it's normalizing an agenda. I think it's saying it's okay to be different. You don't have to be like everybody else because nobody is the same, and it's just really telling people be comfortable with who you are because there's nobody else like you out there.
And it's like it's a process. Even Sasha's parents
Yeah.
at times wrestled with it or used the wrong pronoun. Like, oh my gosh, I said him instead of they, because it's not just a
Yeah.
quick. It's a whole family and it's a whole journey and you're absolutely right. It's about for Sasha discovering themselves.
Yeah.
In its entirety, and their parents helping kind of through that process too, and that it's not always easy from the parent perspective. That's actually what I liked, is that you got a lot of different perspectives in this book as well. Richard's mom, and we saw a lot of just different aspects.
And while the book might be relatable to somebody who is struggling with finding their gender or their identity, I think that it's not just gonna all of a sudden turn your kid gay. I think it's just validating other people's experiences, considering that Sasha did struggle with what labels they wanted to use for themselves or how they felt as a person. But it's not going to just uproot your child and all of a sudden, like, a day later, they decide that they want to be gay. I think it's just a process in general and finding out who you are, especially because when you're a teenager, everything is confusing. And I think that's something that not only myself, because I am a high school student, I think it's something that a lot of kids can relate to. Just a really confusing time because you're worrying about so many different things. And I think that this is such a validating book for not just people who are struggling with their gender, but just struggling with life as a whole. Like in terms of Richard, they might be struggling with their I would try to find the right word to describe it, like their behavior, like they're feeling upset and they don't know how to take their anger out, and seeing Richard's experience and being able to come to terms with how he might be struggling, but taking it out on other people wasn't the best way, and how he was able to reform himself over that time might resonate with some people, finding that, oh, I might be feeling upset, but the best way to deal with this is to talk to somebody I trust. Because that's what Richard did. He went and talked to Caprice, her name was? Went and talked to Caprice, and showing how by being able to confide in somebody that you trust, it can stop you from going down this harmful path to not only yourself but others, so.
It's never too late to turn things around.
All right, as I look at the clock, is there anybody else who has another strength? Otherwise, I want to make sure we do justice to the rest of our agenda this evening. All right, then I'm going to switch us gears. Concerns of the book and its use, either in the ELA curriculum or being available in the library.
I mean, obviously, the vulgar language is in there, even though it was appropriate with the retelling of the events, it could be offensive or harsh to some readers. And I also think some readers may struggle with the maturity to read about the gender identity respectfully. I do worry that some students would, but that's why it's the parent's job to read these book reviews, to have the dialogue with your student, look at the whole list of books and decide if this is the right book for them. I found the book reviews very easy to find, very easy to read, gave me a lot of information. So I don't think it should be these are weaknesses. It does include vulgar language, it does involve some pretty, mature topics, but I know in part of the complaint, it was talked about how a lot of parents don't have time to look over the list or didn't just signed off and didn't really look into the book. So that is a concern if there are students that their parents aren't doing that diligence at home. But I think as a family to determine if this is the right book for their child to read. It should be a discussion and looked into deeper before the decision is made.
I mean, I also feel that I'm pretty sure that in my English class this past year, we didn't do our first choice book club until a few months in. So I feel like I would trust my teacher enough to not put this book in the hands of a very immature student, because it might be a super inspiring story for others, but if a teacher fears that this is going to make a child behave in a poor way or ignite something in them, that they would be saying these hateful language or these hateful sentences or phrases to other people, that because of reading this book, I'm pretty confident in the ability of an English teacher to not let a child read this, because when it comes down to it, it's still a choice book club, and you can choose what book you want to read. And same with library usage. If a kid doesn't want to read a book, they're not going to go to the library and check it out. So I find that even though in many, I understand the complaints about vulgar language or the different themes in this book, but I feel like I would trust my English teacher to know what's best for each kid, especially if you're not doing choice book clubs until a month or two in, so that the teachers know already. So.
And we have really invested parents in our school district who are, connected with their student, their child, and have those discussions. And so I think the majority of our parents at the high school are connected. So I think making a decision for the small minority would have a negative impact on the larger population.
Other concerns? All right, so if we are done with that portion of our agenda, we go to the last portion of our agenda this evening. It's the discussion and recommendation from this committee to the superintendent related to this review process. So just to remind this group, our community members who are here, maybe watching at home, once this is done, I'll write that process up. At that point in time, If there is a removal, that has to go to the school board. If the book were to be kept in place, then the person requesting the reconsideration has X number of days to make an appeal to the superintendent, so that process is not over, and so that'll be outlined in my report also. But as part of this report, I need to make a recommendation, both on the usage in the ELA curriculum and usage in the library. So I need to make sure that we are clear on that. When you're speaking, if one is different than the other, please make sure you say that, or say I'm speaking for both, just so I can appropriately take notes of that this evening. So I will open that up to the committee so we can start on recommendations.
I can start with that one if you don't mind. First, as a choice for, a book choice for English 3, I believe it should stay on the list as a choice book. Every reader should have an opportunity to find something that fits their interests and needs. Too many students have been turned off of reading because they didn't have any choice in what book they read. I've been in the district a long time. We've seen multiple curriculums go through. The book choice is one of the best things I've seen in the English classes. We have 600 copies of some books because every freshman had to read it, or every sophomore had to read it. And there were so many kids that were turned off and didn't get anything out of it. The other flip side of it is that, I don't think this, I just lost my train of thought. Sitting here listening is something I wish everybody got the opportunity to do in school. I have the opportunity to see the kids progress from kindergarten through 12th grade, to watch them discuss books as little ones and move on. You can see the development go on and on and on. And by the time they get to high school, they are much, much better at doing the book discussions. I can do a book talk, but to listen to them do a book discussion is like, oh my gosh, when did you grow up? Okay, it is absolutely phenomenal. The language in it, they don't sit and quote out the language in it. They pull out every piece that, I mean, every one of these concepts that you guys just all talked about, and they discuss them in a very mature manner. And it's because they got to choose the book that they were interested in and could stand behind. Watching the kids sit there and try and do that with something that they were forced to read, there are so many doing absolutely nothing and absolutely not engaged at all. This is much more engaging for our kids. So that's my take on the English. On the libraries, that's a little bit different story for me because my job is extremely different. My favorite quote is, libraries have a book for every student, but not every book is for every student. The library is about having choices for its patrons. We teach from kindergarten grades on and up that it is okay not to like a book. If you don't like the pictures in it, you put it back and you get a different one. If you don't, you open it up and it has things like, I don't know, dogs barking and things like that, and you're afraid of dogs. You put it back and you get one with fluffy kitties in it, you know. It sounds so simplistic, but we start that very early on, and that builds up to the maturity at the high school. My job is to make sure, my professional code is to serve all of my students and staff, no matter where they are, no matter what their background is, what their culture is, or anything else. It's not my beliefs. It's not if I like the book or don't like the book. When I review books, I read all the professional reviews, and I try and build a balanced collection. A fun little story, speaking of puppies and kittens, because I want to, just not get misinterpreted. A lot of years ago, we had a librarian in the district that hated spiders, absolutely hated spiders. And she was in charge of cataloging all the books in the district. And when the other librarians would order spider books, she would have to touch them, and she's like, why do you keep ordering these? You know? We can't not order them because our kids, some of our kids are really into spiders, you know? So that's putting it from the simplistic point. The biggest challenge libraries have is making sure that we have a variety of materials that reflect the many different interests, cultures, and needs of the students in our buildings. Once again, libraries have a book for every student, but not every book is for every student. So that would be my take on it. I believe it should stay in both.
I agree. Specifically because of policy 361.1 on instructional resources and services. If you look at the last paragraph of the policy, it's a discrimination part of it. The district shall not unlawfully discriminate in the selection and evaluation of instructional materials or resources on the basis of sex, sexual orientation, race, color, gender identity, national origin, continue on. And so I actually went through the complaint to make sure that we would not be in violation of any school board policy, because violation of school board policy opens them up for lawsuits. So like you have to do that. And so in the complaint, it was the reasons for pulling this resource. There was vocabulary such as normalization of dysfunctional behaviors. Immature students might experiment with suggested sexuality. To accept the delusion that people can choose and change their gender. Those are all very concerning, and in my opinion, it's discrimination against gender identity and would seriously jeopardize the district if we pulled them. So my recommendation is to keep them in the library and in the book clubs.
I would recommend keeping the book in current use as a choice book for book clubs for English 3 with parent notification, with the note that would go home for parents with the titles to select, and in the library use.
I support them in both.
I do as well.
I would definitely vote to keep in both the ELA curriculum and the library. Some of the notes that I wrote down about this book was it inspires thoughtful conversations, it's validating, educational, and uplifting, and it still gives students and parents that choice. And I think that having choice is one of the most powerful things a student can have, because they're able to open up their perspective to so many different things. And I remember somewhere around fall or winter of last year in my English honors class with Mrs. Schumacher, I was given The Kite Runner as one of my books. And The Kite Runner wasn't one of my top choices, and I was kind of nervous about reading the book at first because like, oh, I don't think I would really like the topic. But after reading the book, I realized how eye-opening it was to some story that was not super similar to mine, because the character came from a completely different background, was going through completely different things than I was. But that's one of the joys of reading, is being able to experience something that you don't experience in your everyday life. And after reading the book, I found out how much I really enjoyed the author, so I did end up putting more of his books on my to-be-read list. And I really think that reading this book, especially because it's in a format that's so different from books that I might normally read, really opens up the opportunity for students to discover books about topics that they enjoy. And I think that this book was a topic that I enjoyed, and I would totally read something that's similar to it. And again, kind of what Mrs. Sarek was talking about with removing books and they can't be removed for discrimination. I find that calling some of these beliefs and the gender identity and the belief that you can switch your gender, calling it delusional is really hurtful to kids or teens my age that might be going through something like this, which is really why I think books like this are important, because it's just really showing kids and teens that just because you are different doesn't mean you're weird or you're delusional or anything like that. Even because if you might be called names or if you might be bullied for it, just showing them that there are other people out there that can relate to you. And having that to be able to read and relate to other people is just something that's super important in my opinion. So that's why I think that they should stay in the curriculum and the library.
You're so wonderfully spoken.
Thank you.
Which kind of leads into where, you know, I've really been listening and I've reviewed all of the pieces that have kind of come forth to really think about how do we approach this. And I do think that one of the goals that we talk about a lot in education, just in general and really specifically within our school district, is the goal that we have to build critical thinkers. This is huge. We want our students, every teacher wants to build a classroom of critical thinkers and to explore the world and have that. I worry that removing the choice to even think critically about what books we want to read removes that availability for not just our students, but our families too. So my recommendation would be to keep these as choice selections with the same pieces that you had shared in terms of having the reviews available, having the pieces for families to be really engaged if they are interested, for students to know what they're reading about, because the exploration piece is a big part of that. And thinking critically about, is this the right type of book for me? Do I learn from this? So my recommendation would be choice for both.
All right. I think I've heard from everybody. All right, so that'll conclude our meeting tonight. Just as a reminder here as we wrap up, one, thank you for taking the time to serve on this committee. I appreciate that. The community, the school district appreciates that. I will be filling out reports. I'm sending them out hopefully by the end of the week to all of you. So I appreciate that very much. If you did borrow a book from me last time, please leave it because Ms. Christensen will dock me for it. Probably checked out to me, so I appreciate that. Are there any other questions from the committee before we adjourn this evening?